Debuting from the days of Medarot 8 and the 3DS era of Medarot titles, it is the female Wandering Samurai type, SAM-01F Tomoe, with the kit of Fight Boost, Beam Sword, Charge Drain, Biped Legs, and the leg ability of Shura, which buffs base damage dealt when attacked and a part is broken from the enemy's attack. Now, Tomoe, we've actually seen a pretty fair number of times already as an enemy NPC, so even before her debut here, we already had a relatively solid idea of how she behaves. But going forward, she will be officially pullable as a gacha-based model to make her cycles, and all the same, she is packing a very powerful Metaforce-based kit that has very good synergy with itself, contrary to most other models that you'd see on the shelves and in conventional teams. Fight Boost is a support-based skill that, once activated, will buff melee damage to herself and all of her allies by about 50% or so, dealing considerably more melee damage than before once that buff goes active. Right Arm of Beam Sword is an optic attribute melee skill, which gets a ×2 damage bonus at 30% charge and a ×3 damage bonus at 100% charge. Left Arm of Charge Strain is more or less a conventional ailment, if I could call it anything, that when attacking an enemy will outright steal a portion of their Metaforce gauge, upwards of about 15% or so for each attack, and fill her own Metaforce gauge with it. This alone ties very, very nicely with Beam Sword, as without Metaforce Sustain to keep this going, you really don't have a lot of easy ways to power it up quickly. Biped Legs means that Tomoe will have relatively good coverage on all terrains, as arguably one of the best well-rounded legs compared to most others, but her leg stats are kind of subpar to a point. Not to say that they're bad, but they are noticeably lower than most other things that we've seen up to this point, which may hold her back just a little bit. A mobility of 668 isn't terrible, but she will definitely be outrun by a lot of pretty considerably powerful foes or opponents that have a higher base mobility or even higher heat or cool than her. An evade of 935 is, I'd say, relatively normal, not bad, but not super great either. But she'll have a moderately decent time dodging or grazing a lot of low success or really blind skills. Melee resist of 1330 means that Tomoe can hold herself up close and personal very, very easily, with very little in terms of punish damage, and do a relatively good job reducing incoming melee damage. But a shoot resist of 718 isn't super great, but compared to her melee resist, she will take a considerably noticeable higher amount of shooting damage from those particular attacks, and have more difficulty being able to block those. Overall, her armor pull and her base power are actually pretty solid too, with a head armor of about 3650, right arm about 3100, left at 3200, and legs at 3400. She has a pretty healthy armor pull, if I'm completely honest, which would be fully expected of a warrior type that Tomoe is, especially given her name. In addition to that, the base power as well is relatively nice, and I find it relatively interesting too that her beam sword actually is non-heavy, which will make using her or her arm very easy and provide a lot more flexibility when building it, whereas Charge Drain being heavy may kind of round her out just a little bit with that. That being said, as a pure set score, I do honestly have to rate Tomoe a pretty solid 7 out of 10, and a pretty good upper tier base Metaforce reliant melee fighter, especially for mono female teams. Between Fight Boost and Charge Drain, and even Shura when she does end up taking damage, she actually has very good synergy with herself when it comes to powering up her beam sword, and that honestly means that aside from making sure that she doesn't die too quickly, she can fight moderately well on her own with very little outside support necessary, unless they can provide, say, Charge Plant or something that can help her with her Metaforce Sustain to use Beam Sword a little faster with its higher damage multipliers. However, the one thing that will ultimately hold Tomoe back in this case is the fact that her mobility is relatively and noticeably lower than most others you will see, so do not expect her to run to the line with any particular speed or grace compared to, say, as an example, Heal Angel or even Gato Alpar in many cases. As mixed parts, I do have to rate her just a little bit higher at a 7.5 out of 10, because by mixing the parts up or even using, say, Beam Sword and Charge Drain together, and maybe even switching out the legs for something a little faster that can support one heavy part, this alone will very considerably increase Tomoe's viability and use on the field, because normally it's very likely going to be the speed holding her back. Or instead, if you pair off the Beam Sword arm with, say, Deer Stage's full charge head or something similar, that can very easily fill the Metaphor's sustained requirement for you to unload Beam Saber at its highest and most dangerous damage potential very quickly and very easily.